So I am not all the way through the hearing that y'all had yesterday, but I'm watching so much of it like this, like just
Yes,
like
that's kind of how we felt a lot of the
what is
time. Like,
going
what's
on?
going on? Exactly.
So can you tell us, I don't think my followers are really familiar with Title 4A and what is at
Sure.
stake for students if this program gets gutted or rolled into a block grant.
Yeah, well, I can give you some background. So I've been an education activist for a long time. My kids are grown now, they're in their 30s, but my work in education advocacy started when they were pretty young. And I found that when they were going through the public schools in Beaverton, Oregon, the schools were missing things like arts and music, and the class sizes were big, and why is the play structure falling apart? So I became one of those parents who was saying, "Hey, these are our public schools. Let's make them better." And then later, when I was in the state legislature on the education committee, I kept hearing from educators and parents, it's like, what's with all this focus on test scores? There's so much testing and so much emphasis on test scores that we don't have time for classes like social studies and history and painting and choir and all these things that are really important to a well-rounded education. So, it didn't take too long for me to figure out it was because of a well-intentioned, but really bad in execution federal law called No Child Left Behind. And so what No Child Left Behind did, I mean, it sounds great, right? Because that's what we want, no child left behind, right? But what happened is that they put all this emphasis on test scores. And what they did in No Child Left Behind is they said, if a school does not get good test scores, we're going to label that school as failing, right? And send the students out for a tutor. And I thought, wait, what is wrong with this picture? A school isn't failing, a school is a building. If the students aren't doing well, let's ask the question why they aren't doing well, right? Like maybe there's lead in the water, maybe they're hungry, maybe their sizes are too big. So what happened was I decided to run for Congress because No Child Left Behind was a federal law. And I felt like I couldn't make things better, although at the state level I was passing bills like, let's get rid of duplicative testing so that students aren't taking the same test twice. It doesn't make any sense. Those tests, those assessments should be used to inform how to make instruction better, not to label schools as failing. So I got to Congress. I'm like number 435 of all these 435 members of the U.S. House, and I thought, how am I ever going to do this? But I earned a spot on the Education Committee, and then we started working on this. And in the end of 2015, we passed a very bipartisan bill, and it came through the Education Committee. I was on what's called the conference committee, where you reconcile the Senate version that was slightly different from the House version. I was on that conference committee, and I got some amendments in there and had a big part of that bill. And what that bill did was it consolidated a lot of other programs to try to simplify things, but really understanding that the federal role in education is to meet the needs of all students, right? So I worked really hard on Title 4A, and that is a program within the Every Student Succeeds Act, which was the replacement of No Child Left Behind. And in that grant program, there are three big categories. One of them is well-rounded education. And like I was talking about, that's so important for kids. I'm a huge supporter of arts education, well-rounded education. The other is technology, and the other is school safety. So those are the three sort of big buckets, and those programs are all under Title 4A. And since 2015, I've been leading typically bipartisan appropriations letters saying fund that, because this gives grants to schools so they can level the playing field. Because Mrs. Frazzle, and I know your listeners know, that the students who live in wealthy districts, they're going to have art and music, and they're going to have extra resources for technology. But what our job is here in Congress is to sort of level the playing field so that all students in public schools have those. So needless to say, I was really frustrated that now they're saying, well, we need to consolidate this and end all these grant programs. And the reason I started out by questioning the secretary about her statements in the Senate is that she said, if Congress appropriates the money, we have to provide it. And she's saying, well, we're just streamlining it. But no, you're making billions of dollars of cuts to it. That's a cut. So I know that was a really long answer, but I wanted to give you background on why I care so much about Title IV-A and think about the gaps that will be in educational opportunities without that funding.
Yeah, that I'm so glad that you did, because I recently did a video trying to explain the difference between No Child Left Behind, and I was like, it's tricky to understand. So that's really helpful.
And the other big things in addition to that change, fewer better quality assessments and more assessment literacy, so educators know more about what's a good assessment, right? And then maintaining local control. And it makes me want to scream and holler when they say we're doing these cuts and ending the Department of Education to give education decisions back to the states. The states already have them. They set the curriculum. They decide how many teachers are in each classroom and teacher standards. Those are things that they already have, is that power to set. We don't set curriculum. We help level the playing field. We open doors of opportunity. So that was the other big thing about the Every Student Succeeds Act, is the fewer better assessments, maintaining that local control, because communities are different and make different decisions, but really having those grant programs. And there's lots of titles, like Title II is professional development. Title III is about English language learners. So there's all these titles, but 4A is my passion because I care so much about having those opportunities. You might have heard one of the Republicans say, we want to teach kids not what to think, but how to think. You don't teach kids how to think without a well-rounded education.
That drove me crazy, because also they are telling kids what to think, just their own agenda, but that's a whole other thing. I'm just like, what are you talking about? So, I mean, that kind of segues into the next thing I want to ask you about. If someone is watching clips of these hearings, they're hearing Secretary McMahon and Republicans talking about waste a lot. And what would you want them to know about what's actually on the line with this budget?
Yeah, they use that line as like waste, fraud, and abuse, but what they're doing is not saving money. It is, as I said, closing doors of opportunity. So it isn't really waste, fraud, and abuse. That is an excuse for trying to cut things. And I have to say, it's been incredibly frustrating because, Secretary McMahon, she didn't really answer a lot of questions. She didn't know the answers to questions. She had somebody handing her sort of cue cards because she didn't know what to say. And you might have seen her in some of the Senate hearings sort of fumbling and not doing math. And you probably heard her talk about A1 instead of AI. And so my point is that 2 points. Number one is that this administration is full of people who are there not because of their competence or because of their dedication to the issue, but because they're loyal to the president, right? Yeah. So that's one of them. And the other one is that, the people making these decisions, like Secretary McMahon, like Donald Trump, like Elon Musk, they're so out of touch with what happens. Like, do you think Donald Trump or Elon Musk have ever set foot in a public school? No. They don't know what happens in public schools, right? So they're out of touch, and so is she. She's very out of touch. I don't know what her background is when she was a child, but I mean, they don't struggle to put food on the table. Let me tell you that. They don't know what it's like to be a teacher in a class with kids who are hungry, or kids with disabilities, and how challenging that is. We have to have. She says she's not cutting IDEA, but what message does it say when they say we're going to get rid of the Department of Education and they want America first? It's crazy, right?
It's maddening.
If we wanted America first, we'd have a great, robust, well-funded system of public education from early childhood through colleges and universities.
Yes, and she keeps saying things like, oh, well, we're not Germany, we're not this country, we're not that country. And it's like, but y'all keep comparing the United States to these other countries and saying, oh, we're being outperformed. Well, what are they doing? Because they are continually investing in education.
That's a great point, and I have a lot to say about that. But because I've called them out in the committee for doing that before, like, look at us compared to all these other countries, like Sweden, Finland. Well, you know what they have in those countries? They have universal health care. They have paid family leave. They have well-paid teachers who are really treated with respect. Teachers have autonomy. and they just don't let their kids live in poverty. So when you look at those scores, the scores, and say, okay, what would happen in our country if we had universal health care, if we didn't have homeless students, if we didn't have hungry students, if everybody had access to paid parental leave, and their child care, their early childhood education, childcare is either free or low cost. And here, last I looked at the statistics, a large percentage of moms go back to work within 2 weeks of having a baby. That doesn't happen in other countries. They have that time to heal and recover and bond with their kids. So there's so many differences. And then the reason I talked about brought up the NAEP scores is because they always talk about the NAEP scores, and that's a two-part. Number one is if you look at the NAEP scores and you adjust, or as I said, disaggregate the data, the students from the wealthier districts and the wealthier families where the kids go home to a home full of books and a good meal and parental support, they're doing okay. It's the kids who struggle, and that's why this funding is so important to help keep those kids in school. And that's why at the end I said, look, you should care about every single student in this country. As a Secretary of Education, your job is not just to look out for the kids who have parents who think that they're going to save their child by moving them to a charter school or save their child by getting a voucher that they can use in some private school. That's not the job of a secretary should be. And that's why I said, if you can't execute these laws that we passed, you shouldn't be in the job.
Yes, and I'm so glad you said that. I literally was like, yay.
Oh, thank you. Well, and the other point about the NAEP scores too is that those are done through the bureau, the division that they're cutting. They cut 90% of the staff in that program. 90% of the staff. And that's how we get the research, like what are the best practices, what works, what doesn't. They cut the research, and then that's where they do the NAEP score. So you've got hardly anybody left. 20 people left in the whole division.
And they're insisting that they're still going to do it. The department put out a letter saying, "Oh no, we're still going to do the NAEP test as planned." And I was like,
"How?
How?
Right.
With who?"
Right, and with higher education too, you move with the student loan portfolio. You got rid of all the people who manage this massive $1.6 trillion loan portfolio. And if I could say for a moment that Education Committee's piece of the reconciliation, the big bad bill, they say it's big beautiful. It's a really bad bill. It's just going to close the door of opportunity to higher education. It's going to make it harder for people to go to college. I worked my way through, I started with community college for 2 years, and then I did college for 2 years, and then I did a law school for 3 years. And I did it all with federal grants and support and work study. Those doors of opportunity, I called it a dream killer. It's going to be a lot harder for students from low-income families or on their own like I was to go to college. So that's not good for our country. Again, there's no waste, fraud, and abuse in getting people into education. Education is one of the best investments we can make.
Gosh, I feel like I could talk to you for like 8,000 hours, but I feel like you have to go do work. But thank you so much.
They're about to call votes, which is why the buzzing keeps happening. So
I figured.
But it's okay because I've really enjoyed talking with you and happy to come back anytime. And I never take off my parent hat, even though my kids are grown. We learn our values at an early age. And to me, the values we have about taking care of the next generation, and the next generation is that's what's important, is a better future for our kids and my eventual grandkids, which I don't have yet, but maybe will someday, and the future generation. So happy to come back anytime and talk about that.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman.
Thank you.
Have a good vote.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.
Bye.